When the phone rang that Tuesday afternoon in March, 23 years after my daughter vanished from the schoolyard, I wasn't prepared for the voice on the other end to say, "Mom?" The word hit me like a freight train, but what came next shattered everything I thought I knew about those missing years. "Mom, I need you to know something before we meet. The woman who took me, she wasn't a monster, and I loved her." My name is Margaret Rose Whitmore, though most folks around Ashland, Kentucky just call me Maggie. I'm 68 years old now, and I've spent more than half my life carrying a weight that never got lighter, only more familiar. Like how you get used to a scar, the way it becomes part of your landscape, even though it never stops aching when you touch it. For 23 years, I lived in a strange kind of limbo, caught between the woman I was before that September afternoon in 2001 and the woman I had to become after. But I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? That's what happens when you've told a story so many times in your head that the ending keeps bleeding into the beginning. Let me start where I should, with the moment that split my life clean in two, the before and after that every mother who's lost a child understands in their bones. It was a Thursday, September 13th, 2001. The whole country was still reeling from the attacks 2 days before, and I remember thinking how small our town felt, how vulnerable everything seemed. I was 45 years old, working the afternoon shift at Morrison's Diner on Winchester Avenue, and my daughter Emma, my sweet, gap-toothed, freckle-faced Emma, was 7 years old and in second grade at Putnam Elementary. The call came at 3:47 p.m. I remember because I was refilling the Heinz ketchup bottles, a task I hated, and I just glanced at the Coca-Cola clock on the wall, calculating how much longer until I could leave. The phone behind the counter rang, and Darla, the other waitress, answered it. The way her face changed, went from tired to terrified in the space of a heartbeat, made my hands go numb. "Maggie," she said, and her voice was shaking. "It's the school." Before I tell you what comes next, I need you to understand something. This story, this impossible, heartbreaking, beautiful story, it needs to be heard. Not just by me, but by anyone who's ever felt like giving up, who's ever thought that hope was just another word for foolishness. If this story touches something in you, if it makes you feel less alone in whatever darkness you're carrying, do me a favor and hit that like button. I know it seems small, but it tells me you're out there, listening, and that these words matter. Your support helps me share these stories with more people who need to hear them, and I'm grateful for every single one of you who takes that moment to let me know you're there. I need to take you back further than that terrible Thursday, though, back to the beginning. To the life I built before it all came crashing down. Because you can't understand the depth of the hole without knowing what the ground looked like first. I grew up in Ashland, born in 1956 to a coal miner's daughter and a railroad worker. My daddy, James Whitmore, worked for CX Transportation, and my mama, Dorothy, took in sewing to help make ends meet. We lived in a small house on Carter Avenue, 3 bedrooms for 6 people, me, my parents, my 2 brothers, Danny and Kevin, and my grandmother, who we called Mama. The house always smelled like Mama's buttermilk biscuits and the Aquanet hairspray Mama used to keep her silver hair in perfect pin curls. Money was tight, the way it was for most working families in eastern Kentucky. We weren't poor exactly, but we knew the difference between want and need. Daddy made sure we had food on the table and a roof over our heads, but there wasn't much left over for extras. I wore hand-me-downs from my cousin Judy, and I got my first new dress when I was 12, a blue gingham thing from JCPenney that I treated like it was made of gold thread. I met Robert Parker when I was 19, working at the soda fountain in Woolworth's downtown. He was 22, fresh out of the Army, with dark hair and green eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He ordered a cherry Coke, and when I set it down in front of him, he said, "You've got the prettiest smile I've ever seen." We were married 6 months later, in April of 1976, at the First Baptist Church on 13th Street. Robert got a job at Armco Steel, working the blast furnace. It was hot, dangerous work, but it paid decent, and we were able to rent a little apartment above Baker's Hardware on Winchester Avenue. The place wasn't much: 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, and a bathroom with pipes that groaned like dying animals when you ran the water, but it was ours. I decorated it with secondhand furniture and curtains I made from fabric remnants Mama gave me, and I thought I was living in a palace. We tried for years to have a baby, month after month of hoping and disappointment, until I started to believe that maybe it just wasn't meant to be. I was 37 years old when I finally got pregnant, and I spent the whole 9 months terrified that something would go wrong, that this precious gift would be taken away before I even got to hold it. Emma Rose Parker came into the world on March 15, 1994, at King's Daughters Medical Center, weighing 6 pounds 3 ounces. She had a full head of dark hair like her daddy and my brown eyes, and when they laid her in my arms, I understood for the first time what people meant when they said your heart could live outside your body. Robert cried when he held her, actual tears running down his face, and he whispered, "We made something perfect, Maggie. We made something perfect." Those first years with Emma were the happiest of my life. Robert was a devoted father, the kind who got down on the floor to play dollhouse, who never complained about being woken up in the middle of the night, who sang off-key lullabies while walking her around the living room when she had colic. We moved out of the apartment and into a small house on Montgomery Avenue when Emma was 2, a modest place with a fenced yard and a porch swing Robert hung himself. But life has a way of taking with one hand what it gives with the other. In May of 1999, when Emma was 5 and starting kindergarten that fall, Robert started complaining of headaches, bad ones that made him sensitive to light and sound. The doctor at the clinic said it was probably stress, prescribed some pills, sent him home. By July, he couldn't hide the symptoms anymore: the dizzy spells, the confusion, the way words sometimes got tangled up on their way out of his mouth. The diagnosis came in August: glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor that the oncologist at St. Mary's explained with a lot of medical terms that all meant the same thing. There was nothing they could do. Robert died on November 3, 1999, 2 months before the new millennium. He was 46 years old. Emma was 5.5, old enough to understand that Daddy wasn't coming back, young enough to keep asking why. I fell apart for a while after that. My mama moved in to help with Emma while I worked double shifts at Morrison's, trying to keep up with the mortgage and the medical bills that insurance hadn't covered. I was running on coffee and grief, going through the motions of living without really being alive. But Emma needed me, and that need was the only thing that kept me from disappearing entirely into the dark. By 2001, we'd found our rhythm, Emma and me. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was ours. I worked the lunch and afternoon shifts at the diner, which meant I could drop Emma off at school in the morning and pick her up most days by 4. Mama still came over some evenings to help with dinner and homework, giving me a chance to breathe. Emma was thriving, a bright, curious 7-year-old who loved reading and art, who wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up because she loved animals more than anything. She'd started 2nd grade that September, and her teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had already called to tell me what a joy Emma was to have in class. She'd made friends with a girl named Sophie Chen, and the 2 of them were inseparable, always whispering secrets and giggling over things only 7-year-olds found funny. Emma had Robert's dimples and his easy laugh, and seeing those pieces of him living on in her made the missing hurt a little less. The town itself was small, maybe 20,000 people if you counted the surrounding county. Most folks knew each other, at least by sight. It was the kind of place where you left your doors unlocked, and kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. The steel mill and the hospital were the biggest employers, and on Friday nights, half the town showed up at the high school to watch the Tomcats play football. Ashland sat right on the Ohio River, with Kentucky on one side and Ohio on the other, connected by bridges that lit up at night like strings of pearls. Downtown was struggling even then, with more empty storefronts than open businesses, but there was still the old Paramount Theater where they showed movies for $3, and the A&W where teenagers hung out, and the library with its musty smell and endless shelves of possibility. I felt safe there. We all did. Even after 9/11, even with the whole country feeling raw and vulnerable, Ashland still felt like a place where nothing really bad could happen. That's what made what came next so impossible to comprehend, so shattering in its randomness. That Thursday started normal. I woke Emma up at 6:30, made her scrambled eggs and toast the way she liked it, with grape jelly spread thick. She wore her favorite outfit, denim overalls with a rainbow patch on the bib and a yellow t-shirt underneath. Her hair was in 2 braids, and she'd lost one of her front teeth the week before, making her smile look charmingly lopsided. "Can Sophie come over after school?" she asked, swinging her legs under the kitchen table. "We'll see," I told her, the automatic parent response that meant probably yes. "Finish your breakfast first." I dropped her off at 7:45, watching her run toward the school entrance where Sophie was waiting. Emma turned and waved, her Scooby-Doo backpack bouncing, and I waved back, blowing her a kiss. It was such an ordinary moment, the kind that happens hundreds of times in a childhood. I had no way of knowing it would be the last time I'd see her as my little girl. The school day ended at 3:15. Emma usually walked out with Sophie, and Sophie's mom, Lisa, would bring both girls to the diner where I'd give them chocolate milk and let them sit in a booth doing homework until my shift ended at 5. It was our routine, carved out of necessity, but comfortable in its predictability. But that day, 3:15 came and went. So did 3:30. By 3:45, Lisa had called the school, her voice tight with concern. The secretary, Mrs. Palmer, checked with Mrs. Henderson, who said Emma had been there for dismissal. They'd walked out together, the whole class, and Emma had been standing with Sophie on the front steps. And then, nothing. Somewhere between the school steps and the parent pickup line, between one moment and the next, Emma had simply vanished. The phone call from the school came at 3:47 p.m., and Darla's face told me everything before the words did. I dropped the ketchup bottle I was holding, it shattered on the linoleum floor, red spreading out like blood, and I ran. I didn't even take off my apron, didn't grab my purse, just ran out the door and down Winchester Avenue toward the school, 6 blocks away. My mind was already spinning through possibilities, none of them horrible yet. She'd gotten confused about pickup, she'd gone home with Sophie without telling anyone, she was hiding somewhere, playing a game, thinking it was funny. Kids did thoughtless things sometimes. This was just a misunderstanding. But when I got to Putnam Elementary and saw the police cars already in the parking lot, their lights throwing blue and red across the brick building, I felt something inside me crack. Principal Davidson met me at the entrance, and the look on his face made my legs go weak. "Mrs. Parker," he said, and his hand on my arm was meant to be steadying, but felt like it was the only thing keeping me upright. "We're doing everything we can. The police are here, and we're searching the building and the grounds." "Where's my daughter?" The words came out sharp, edged with something that wasn't quite panic yet. "Where is Emma?" They took me to the principal's office, sat me down in a chair that smelled like old coffee and fear. Officer Raymond Miller, who'd been 2 years ahead of me in high school, squatted down in front of me, his face kind but serious. "Maggie, we need you to stay calm and answer some questions," he said. "What was Emma wearing today?" I described the overalls, the yellow shirt, the braids. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too steady, like it belonged to someone else. Officer Miller wrote everything down in a small notebook, and I watched his hand move across the page, forming letters that spelled out my daughter's disappearance. Has Emma ever run off before? Does she have any places she likes to go? No, never. She's a good girl. She follows rules. She wouldn't just leave. My voice was getting louder, the panic starting to push through. Where is she? What happened to her? They interviewed Mrs. Henderson, who was crying into a wadded tissue. Emma had definitely been in class all day, she said, happy, normal, excited about the weekend. At dismissal, Mrs. Henderson had walked the whole class outside, like she did every day. The children lined up on the front steps, and parents pulled up in cars or walked over to collect them. Emma had been standing with Sophie, holding her hand, both of them chattering about something. Sophie's mother, Lisa, had seen Emma too. She was certain. One moment Emma was there, and the next time Lisa looked, Sophie was alone. When Lisa asked where Emma went, Sophie had shrugged and said, she was just here. The timeline was impossibly narrow. Somewhere between 3:15 and 3:25, in broad daylight, with dozens of parents and teachers around, my 7-year-old daughter had disappeared. They searched the school from top to bottom, every classroom, every closet, the gym, the cafeteria, the bathrooms. They searched the playground, the woods behind the school, the creek that ran along the property line. They brought in dogs that sniffed Emma's jacket from the lost and found box, and then put their noses to the ground, following trails that went nowhere. By 6 o'clock, the search had expanded to the whole neighborhood. Volunteers from the community were walking streets, knocking on doors, checking backyards and garages. The local news had picked up the story, and Emma's school picture, the one taken just 2 weeks earlier where she was missing her front tooth and grinning like life was full of nothing but good things, was already on the evening broadcast. My mama arrived at the school at 7, her face pale, her hands shaking. She wrapped me in her arms and I finally broke, sobbing into her shoulder while she whispered, "They'll find her, baby. They'll find our Emma." But hour after hour passed and there was no Emma. No sightings, no leads, no ransom call. Just an expanding circle of searchers and a growing sense of dread that settled over everything like a thick fog. The FBI arrived the next morning, 2 agents in dark suits who set up in the school library and started asking questions that made my skin crawl. Did Emma have a father in the picture? Were there any custody issues? Had I noticed anyone suspicious hanging around? Did Emma talk to strangers? I answered everything, feeling like I was describing someone else's life. No, Robert was dead. No, there were no issues. No, I hadn't seen anyone. Emma knew not to talk to strangers. I'd taught her that. We'd practiced it. Sometimes children are taken by people they know, one agent said gently. Family members, friends of the family, coaches, teachers. Can you think of anyone who paid Emma unusual attention? The question felt like an accusation. Was I supposed to have noticed something? Had I missed signs, failed to protect her because I was too tired, too busy? Too wrapped up in my own grief over Robert? They interviewed everyone, teachers, neighbors, parents, even the janitor at the school. They looked at sex offender registries and checked alibis and ran background checks. They put up flyers with Emma's picture, thousands of them, plastering them on every telephone pole and storefront window in 3 counties. The thing about waiting for news is that time stops making sense. Minutes feel like hours, hours feel like minutes. You exist in this strange, suspended state where nothing is real except the absence, the Emma-shaped hole in the world where your child used to be. I stayed at the school for 3 days straight, refusing to leave, terrified that if I went home, if I stopped looking, I'd be giving up. Mama brought me food I couldn't eat and coffee I drank cold. People I barely knew brought casseroles and hugged me and said things like, "Stay strong and have faith," that made me want to scream. On the fourth day, they made me go home. The search was ongoing, they said, but I needed rest. I needed to be ready for when Emma came back. When, not if. Everyone kept saying when. The house felt wrong without her. Her cereal bowl from that Thursday morning was still in the sink. Her pajamas were on her unmade bed. Her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Flopsy, was on the pillow, waiting for her to come home and cuddle it. I stood in her doorway, breathing in the smell of her, strawberry shampoo and crayons and the vague sweetness of childhood, and I made a promise. I would find her. I would never stop looking. I would turn over every stone, chase every lead, follow every whisper of hope until I brought my daughter home. I didn't know then that it would take 23 years. I didn't know that when I finally got her back, everything about the story would be different than I imagined. I didn't know that the woman who took Emma would complicate my grief in ways I never could have anticipated. All I knew in that moment was that somewhere, my little girl was out there, and I wouldn't rest until I found her. The first year after Emma disappeared, I lived like a woman possessed. I turned our house into a command center, covering the dining room walls with maps and timelines and photographs. I marked every reported sighting, every possible lead, every theory, no matter how far-fetched. The FBI agents who'd been assigned to Emma's case, Agent Patricia Brennan and Agent Marcus Cole, came by weekly at first, then monthly, their faces growing more sympathetic and less hopeful each time. I quit my job at Morrison's. How could I pour coffee and smile at customers when my daughter was out there somewhere? Mama tried to tell me I needed the income, needed the routine, but I couldn't hear her through the roaring in my ears. Every second I spent doing anything other than searching for Emma felt like a betrayal. The savings Robert and I had built up, modest as it was, became my search fund. I hired a private investigator, a former state trooper named Dale Hutchinson, who worked out of his home office in Huntington, West Virginia. He was expensive, $200 a day plus expenses, but he promised me he wouldn't stop looking. Dale followed up on every tip that came through the hotline the police had set up. There were hundreds in those first months. Someone saw a girl who looked like Emma at a rest stop in Tennessee. Another caller swore they'd seen her at a Walmart in Columbus, Ohio. A psychic from California called to say she'd had a vision of Emma near water, which narrowed it down to approximately everywhere. Each lead sent my heart racing, filled me with desperate hope that crumbled to dust when it turned out to be a different child, a misidentification, a cruel hoax. But I couldn't stop chasing them. What if the one lead I didn't follow was the real one? What if Emma was out there waiting, wondering why I'd given up? The community rallied around me at first. They organized searches every weekend for months. They held fundraisers to help with costs. The First Baptist Church, where I'd been married all those years ago, took up a collection that raised almost $7,000. People were kind, heartbroken on my behalf, determined to help. But kindness has a shelf life when tragedy drags on. By the 6-month mark, the searches had dwindled to a handful of dedicated volunteers. By a year, it was just me and Mama and my brother Danny walking the same streets over and over, posting new flyers over the faded old ones. People started avoiding me at the grocery store. Not out of cruelty, I don't think, but because they didn't know what to say anymore. Any news felt insensitive after asking it 50 times with no answer. So they'd duck down different aisles, and I'd pretend not to notice, loading my cart with single servings of everything, because cooking for one seemed pointless. The second year was worse in a different way. The FBI officially designated Emma's case as cold, which didn't mean they stopped working on it, Agent Brennan assured me, just that they had to allocate resources to newer cases, to children who might still have a chance. The words felt like abandonment. Dale Hutchinson had exhausted his leads. He sat me down in February of 2003 and told me gently that unless something new broke, there wasn't much more he could do. He'd already reduced his rate, was basically working for free at that point, but even dedication has limits when there's nothing left to investigate. I became obsessed with online forums and missing children databases. This was still early internet days, but there were message boards where parents of missing children congregated, sharing information and theories and grief. I spent hours every night on our old Dell computer, the dial-up modem making its screeching connection, reading posts from mothers and fathers who understood exactly what this particular hell felt like. I learned terms I'd never wanted to know: stranger abduction, family abduction, runaway, endangered missing. Emma was classified as endangered missing, stranger abduction suspected. The statistics were grim. Most abducted children who aren't found in the first 48 hours are never found alive. But I refused to believe Emma was dead. I couldn't explain it, this bone-deep certainty that she was still out there. Maybe it was denial, maybe it was a mother's intuition, maybe it was just stubbornness, but I held onto it like a lifeline. By the third year, I'd lost everything that wasn't Emma. The savings were gone. Dale had stopped taking my calls after I couldn't pay his last invoice. The house on Montgomery Avenue went into foreclosure because I'd stopped making mortgage payments, prioritizing search expenses over bills. Mama moved me back into my childhood home on Carter Avenue. Daddy had passed away in 1998, and Mama was living there alone. Her sewing room converted to a bedroom for me. I was 48 years old, sleeping in my teenage bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of a simpler past. I got a job at the Kroger on 13th Street, stocking shelves on the overnight shift. It was mindless work that required nothing of me, which was all I could handle. My coworkers knew my story. Everyone in Ashland knew my story, and they left me alone, which I was grateful for. Emma's birthday became the hardest day of every year. March 15th would roll around, and I'd count how old she would have been. 8, 9, 10. I'd buy a cake from the bakery, stick the appropriate number of candles in it, and sit alone at Mama's kitchen table singing "Happy Birthday" to an empty chair before blowing out the candles myself. I made a wish every year, the same wish: please bring her home. The local news did anniversary stories for the first 5 years. Emma Parker, still missing. They'd interview me on the front steps of Putnam Elementary, and I'd make the same plea to whoever had taken her. Please, if you have her, let her go. She has a family who loves her. She has a mother who needs her. The camera would push in close on my face, and I'd try to hold it together, try to look strong and hopeful instead of broken and desperate. But I could see it in the reporter's eyes, the same thing I saw in everyone's eyes: pity mixed with relief that this tragedy was mine and not theirs. After year 5, the media stopped calling. Emma's case wasn't news anymore. It was just another file in a drawer, another missing child poster gathering dust, another mother who couldn't let go. I started attending a support group for parents of missing children that met monthly at the community center in Huntington. There were 8 of us regular attendees, though the faces changed sometimes as people moved away or, in 2 heartbreaking cases, found out their children had been found dead. We sat in a circle in a room that smelled like instant coffee and industrial carpet cleaner, and we talked about our kids, about the waiting, about the guilt, because there was always guilt, always the nagging voice asking what we could have done differently. Martha Groves, whose 16-year-old son vanished in 1997, became something like a friend. She understood the way everyone else's sympathy felt like sandpaper, the way holidays were minefields, the way you could feel completely alone in a crowded room. We'd sometimes meet for coffee after the meetings, sitting in silence that felt more honest than conversation. "Do you think you'll ever have peace?" I asked her once, about 10 years in. Martha stirred sugar into her coffee, her face thoughtful. I don't think we're built for peace after this, she said. Best we can hope for is finding a way to carry it that doesn't crush us. The years blurred together after that. 2005 became 2010, became 2015. Emma would have been 11. 16, 21. I tried to imagine what she looked like, if she still had my brown eyes, if her hair had stayed dark or lightened like mine did at that age. I wondered if she remembered me, if whoever had taken her had let her keep any part of her old life, or if they'd erased me completely. I saw therapists, 4 different ones over the years. They used words like ambiguous loss and complicated grief and suggested I might need to start accepting that Emma might never come home. One even gently suggested that after so much time, I needed to consider the possibility that Emma was gone, that holding onto hope was preventing me from healing. I never went back to that one. The thing people don't understand about losing a child this way is that you can't grieve properly. When someone dies, you bury them. You have a funeral. There's a terrible finality to it, but there's also closure. When your child is missing, you're stuck in this endless loop of hope and despair. You can't move forward, but you can't go back. You just exist in the horrible now, waiting. I kept Emma's room exactly as it was for 15 years. Her clothes in the dresser, her books on the shelf, Mr. Flopsy on the pillow. Mama thought it was unhealthy, and maybe it was, but I needed that space to exist, needed proof that Emma had been real, that those 7 years of loving her hadn't been a dream. Sometimes I'd stand in the doorway and talk to her, telling her about my day, about what was happening in town, about how much I missed her. I felt crazy doing it, but it also felt necessary, like if I stopped talking to her, she'd fade away completely. I know some of you reading this have experienced your own kinds of loss, your own impossible situations, where hope feels foolish, but giving up feels like dying. If this story is touching something in you, if you're finding pieces of your own pain reflected here, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit that like button. It helps this story reach other people who might need to hear it. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in the darkness makes it a little easier to bear. By 2020, I'd accepted that I'd probably never know what happened to Emma. I was 64 years old, still working at Kroger, still living with Mama, who was 83 and increasingly frail. I'd stopped going to the support group after Martha's son's remains were found in 2018, identified through dental records. Watching her grief finally have a shape felt like looking at my own future. The pandemic hit that March and the world shut down. Suddenly, everyone was trapped in their homes, cut off from normal life, existing in a strange suspended reality. It felt familiar to me. I'd been living in suspended reality for 19 years. I used the lockdown time to finally pack up Emma's room. It wasn't giving up, I told myself. It was just making space. Mama needed that bedroom because the stairs to the second floor were getting too hard for her. I folded Emma's clothes and put them in boxes, labeled and dated, and stored in the attic. I packed away the books and toys and the posters on the wall, Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys, so dated now but frozen in 2001. I kept Mr. Flopsy, though, put him in my own room on the dresser where I could see him every morning. A reminder that I'd been a mother once, that I'd loved and been loved, that those years counted for something. The world started opening back up in 2021. Life resumed some version of normal, though normal felt different than before, more fragile. I turned 65 and started drawing Social Security. Mama's health was declining, her heart was weak, her mind starting to wander. She'd forget things, ask the same questions multiple times, sometimes call me Dorothy, her own mother's name. In her lucid moments, she'd talk about Emma. "Do you think she's happy wherever she is?" she asked me one afternoon in August 2023, while I was helping her with lunch. "I hope so," I said, and I meant it. Somewhere along the way, my prayers had changed from "bring her home" to "let her be okay." If I couldn't have Emma back, I at least wanted to believe she was alive, that she was safe, that her life had been good even if it hadn't been with me. Mama passed away on November 12, 2023, peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was small. Most of the people she'd known were already gone. We buried her next to Daddy in Ashland Cemetery, and I inherited the house on Carter Avenue, the place where I'd grown up and where I'd spent the last 20 years rebuilding some semblance of a life. I was alone for the first time in my life, really alone. No husband, no daughter, no mother. Just me and a house full of memories and a grief that had become so much a part of me, I didn't know who I'd be without it. I started sorting through Mama's things in January 2024. Going through 70 years of accumulated life. Photo albums and recipe cards and costume jewelry and letters. In a box in her closet, I found cards and letters I'd written to Emma but never sent. Birthday cards for every year she'd been gone, Christmas cards, Mother's Day cards, all addressed to Emma Parker, all unsent because I didn't have an address to send them to. Seeing them in Mama's careful keeping broke something loose in me. She'd saved them all, preserved them, kept faith even when I'd started to falter. I sat on her bedroom floor surrounded by my own desperate hope in envelope form, and I cried harder than I had in years. That's when the universe decided to stop being cruel and start being merciful, though I didn't know it yet. March 15th, 2024, Emma's 30th birthday. I'd gotten into the habit over the years of posting on Facebook, one of those missing person pages that families maintain, clinging to social media like it's a lifeline. I posted Emma's age-progressed photo, created by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children when she would have turned 18, along with my annual plea. "Emma, if you're out there, I'm still here. I still love you. It's not too late to come home." I didn't expect anything. I never did anymore. Hope had become a reflex, like breathing, something I did without conscious thought, without real expectation. But that afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number with a 502 area code, Louisville. I almost didn't answer, probably a spam call, but something made me pick up. "Hello?" Silence on the other end. Not dead air, but breathing. Someone was there. "Hello?" I said again, about to hang up. And then a voice, a woman's voice, tentative and shaking. "Mom?" The world stopped, literally stopped. My heart, my breath, time itself, everything just froze. That one word, that single syllable, carried a weight that nearly brought me to my knees. "Emma?" I whispered. "Mom, it's me. It's really me." She was crying. I could hear it in her voice. "I saw your post. I've been looking for you for 3 years. I finally found you." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 23 years of grief and hope and desperation all crashed over me at once. I slid down the wall to the floor, the phone pressed so hard to my ear it hurt. "Where are you? Are you safe? Are you okay?" The questions poured out in a rush. "I'm in Louisville. I'm safe. I'm okay. Mom, I need to see you. But first, I need to tell you something about what happened, about where I've been." "I don't care," I said, and I meant it. "I don't care about any of it. Just tell me you're really you. Tell me this is real." "It's real. I'm real. I remember Mr. Flopsy. I remember Morrison's Diner. I remember you making me scrambled eggs with grape jelly toast. I remember everything, Mom." I was sobbing now, ugly crying. Making sounds I didn't know humans could make. "Where have you been? Who took you?" She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, measured, like she was trying to cushion a blow. Her name was Carol Bennett. She took me from the school that day. Mom, this is going to be hard to hear. She raised me as her own daughter. She told me my name was Sarah Bennett, that she was my mother, that we were running from my abusive father. I believed her. For years, I believed her. The words were knives, each one cutting deeper. Someone had stolen my daughter and convinced her I didn't exist, that I wasn't real, that our 7 years together were a lie. Where is she now? I asked, and there was something dark in my voice, something that wanted revenge, wanted justice, wanted to hurt the person who'd hurt me. She died 3 years ago, cancer. It was after she died that I found out the truth, found the documents she'd hidden, found out who I really was. The phone call lasted for 2 hours. Emma, my Emma, who'd been calling herself Sarah for 23 years, told me everything, or at least she tried to. There were gaps, things she didn't remember or hadn't understood as a child, pieces of the puzzle that might never fit together perfectly. Carol Bennett had been watching Putnam Elementary for weeks before that September day. Emma didn't know why, didn't know what made Carol choose her specifically. Maybe it was random. Maybe Emma reminded Carol of someone. Maybe there was no reason at all beyond opportunity and madness. Carol had simply walked up to Emma on the school steps while everyone was distracted, told her there was an emergency with her mother, that she'd been sent to pick Emma up. Emma, trusting and 7 years old, had gone with her without question. They'd gotten into a blue Honda Civic and driven away, and just like that, my daughter was gone. Carol had been smart about it. She'd already established a new identity in Tennessee, had a rental house ready, had homeschool materials prepared. She dyed Emma's hair blonde, cut it short, started calling her Sarah. She told Emma over and over that her real name was Sarah Bennett, that Maggie wasn't her mother, just someone who'd been watching her while Carol was in the hospital. Emma said it took about 6 months before she started to forget. The memories became fuzzy, dreamlike. Carol was kind to her. That was the part that hurt most to hear. Genuinely loving in a twisted, possessive way. She gave Emma a good life, or what would have been a good life if it hadn't been built on lies and theft. They'd moved around a lot in those first years, Tennessee to Georgia to South Carolina to North Carolina, always staying just long enough to avoid questions, but not long enough to put down roots. Carol worked as a nurse, made decent money, provided for Emma in every way except the one that mattered most, the truth. Emma said, and I could hear the guilt and confusion in her voice. She was my mom, you know? For 23 years, she was the only mother I knew. She helped me with homework and taught me to drive and was there when I had my first heartbreak. How do I reconcile that with what she did to you, to us? I didn't have an answer. How do you hate someone who raised your child with love? How do you forgive someone who stole your child in the first place? The emotions were too complex, too contradictory to fit into simple categories. Emma said the truth started coming out about 3 months before Carol died. Carol had stage 4 lung cancer, and she knew she was dying. She started saying things, confused things because of the medication, about finding the perfect daughter and saving her from a bad life. Emma had dismissed it at first, thought it was the morphine talking. But then Carol, in a moment of clarity one afternoon, had looked at Emma and said, "I'm sorry I took you, but I'm not sorry I had you." Emma had demanded to know what that meant. Carol, too weak and too far gone to maintain the lie anymore, had told her the truth. That Emma wasn't Sarah Bennett. That her real name was Emma Rose Parker, and she'd been taken from a school in Kentucky when she was 7 years old. Emma said she didn't believe it at first, couldn't believe it. But Carol had kept documents hidden in a safe deposit box, Emma's real birth certificate, newspaper clippings about the kidnapping, photos of me from the searches. After Carol died and Emma finally opened that box, The truth had stared back at her in black and white. "I've been looking for you ever since," Emma said, "but you'd moved. The house on Montgomery Avenue was sold to someone else. The phone number I found in the articles was disconnected. I found your Facebook, finally, but I was scared. What if you didn't want me anymore? What if you'd moved on? What if you hated me for not finding you sooner?" "Never," I said fiercely. "Never, never. You're my daughter. Nothing changes that. Not time, not distance, not anything." We made plans to meet. She'd drive to Ashland the following weekend. I gave her the address on Carter Avenue, told her I'd be waiting. We talked until my phone battery was nearly dead, until there were no more words, only the sound of us breathing together across the miles. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of Mama's house, my house now, and tried to process what had just happened. 23 years of searching, hoping, praying, and in a single phone call, everything had changed. But the joy was complicated, tangled up with anger and grief and a strange sense of loss. I'd missed Emma's childhood, her 8th birthday, her first day of middle school, high school graduation, her 20s, all of it stolen. Carol Bennett had taken those years from me, and even though she was dead, even though justice was impossible now, I felt a rage so pure it was almost holy. And yet Emma had said she loved Carol, called her mom without even thinking about it. How was I supposed to compete with 23 years? How was I supposed to be a mother to a 30-year-old woman who already had a mother, even if that mother was a kidnapper? The questions spiraled in my head, but underneath all of them was something simpler, more fundamental. My daughter was alive. She was coming home. After 23 years, Emma was coming home. I spent the week before Emma's visit in a frenzy of activity that was part preparation, part panic. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors that were already clean, washing windows that didn't need washing. I went to the grocery store and bought all the things I remembered Emma liking as a child: grape jelly, chocolate chip cookies, chicken nuggets, before realizing that a 30-year-old woman probably didn't eat the same things as a 7-year-old. I stood in the cereal aisle at Kroger, staring at the boxes of Lucky Charms and Cocoa Puffs, and had a small breakdown. I didn't know my daughter anymore. I didn't know her favorite foods or her favorite color or what she did for a living. I was about to meet a stranger who happened to share my DNA, and I had no idea how to be her mother. Martha Groves, the only person from the support group I still kept in touch with, called me that Tuesday. I texted her the news, and she'd called immediately, her voice filled with the kind of joy and relief that only someone who'd lived through the same nightmare could truly feel. "Maggie, this is a miracle," she said. "I'm so happy for you. So happy." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "What if she doesn't like me? What if we have nothing in common? What if I'm just this sad old woman to her, not a mother?" "You are her mother," Martha said firmly. "Biology doesn't change. Time doesn't change that. Will it be complicated? Yes. Will it take time to build a relationship? Yes. But you have time now. That's what matters. You have time." I called Agent Brennan, who'd retired from the FBI 5 years earlier but had left me her personal number, told me to call if there was ever any development. Her voice broke when I told her Emma was alive, was coming home. "This is why we never close these cases," she said. "This is exactly why. Maggie, I'm so glad I got to hear this news. So glad." I asked if there would be legal ramifications, if I needed to report what happened. Agent Brennan was quiet for a moment. "Normally, yes," she said. "This was a kidnapping, a serious federal crime. But the perpetrator is dead, and the victim is an adult who can make her own choices about how to proceed. If Emma wants to make a formal report, she can. If she wants to let it be, that's her right too. This isn't about justice anymore. Maggie, it's about healing." I thought about that a lot over those waiting days. Justice. What would justice even look like? Carol Bennett was dead. She couldn't be prosecuted, couldn't be punished, couldn't be made to answer for what she'd done. And part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, was glad she was dead because it meant I didn't have to watch Emma defend her, didn't have to see Carol in a courtroom crying and asking for mercy. But another part of me wished Carol was alive, just so I could look her in the eye and ask why. Why Emma? Why me? What gave her the right to decide my daughter would be better off with her than with me? I pulled out the boxes from the attic, the ones with Emma's childhood things, her clothes, her books, her report cards and artwork and school pictures. I spread them out on the dining room table, creating a timeline of the 7 years I'd had with her. There was the pink blanket from the hospital, the one they'd wrapped her in when she was born. Her first shoes, tiny white leather things she'd worn to Robert's funeral. A Mother's Day card she'd made in first grade, with stick figures of the two of us holding hands under a rainbow. I love you, Mommy, in her careful printing. I touched each item like a relic, proof that those years had been real, that before the nightmare there had been something beautiful and whole. Saturday morning arrived with cruel sunshine, the kind of perfect spring day that felt inappropriate for the emotional intensity of what was about to happen. I'd barely slept, kept waking up from dreams where Emma arrived but didn't recognize me, or where I opened the door and she was still 7 years old, unchanged by time. She texted that she was leaving Louisville at 9, would be here by 11:30. I watched the clock obsessively, each minute dragging by like an hour. I changed my outfit 3 times, worried about looking too old, too desperate, too much like the grief-worn woman I'd become, instead of the mother Emma might remember. At 11:15, a silver Toyota Camry pulled up in front of the house. I stood at the window, my hand pressed against the glass, and watched a woman get out of the driver's seat, tall, slender, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the house, her hands shaking. I knew her. I don't know how, but I knew her. Something in the way she stood, in the tilt of her head, in the shape of her face, even from a distance. This was Emma. This was my daughter. I walked to the front door on legs that felt like water, pulled it open, and stepped out onto the porch. Emma turned and our eyes met across the yard. She had my eyes, my brown eyes, and Robert's dimples, and my mother's smile. She was a perfect blend of our family, of all the people I'd loved, standing there real and alive and impossible. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "Emma," I breathed. And then we were both running, meeting in the middle of the yard, crashing into each other with the force of 23 years of missing and longing and love that had never died despite everything. She was taller than me, and I had to reach up to wrap my arms around her neck, but she bent down and pressed her face into my shoulder, and we stood there in the spring sunshine, holding on like we'd never let go again. She smelled like lavender shampoo and coffee and something uniquely her, and I breathed her in, imprinting this moment, this impossible, miraculous moment, into my memory. "You're here," I kept saying. "You're really here. You're alive. You're home." "I'm here," she said through tears. "I'm home, Mom. I'm home." We must have stood there for 10 minutes, just holding each other, crying together, making up for 2 decades of missed hugs and missed moments. Neighbors probably saw us, probably wondered what was happening, but I didn't care. Let them wonder. Let the whole world wonder. My daughter was in my arms. Finally, we pulled back enough to look at each other. I touched her face, traced the features that were familiar and foreign all at once. She did the same to me, her fingers gentle on my cheek, my hair. "You look just like I remembered," she said. "Older, but the same. I was so afraid I wouldn't recognize you." You look like your father, I said, touching the dimple in her right cheek. You have his smile, and my eyes, and my mother's. Emma, you're so beautiful. She laughed, a sound that was pure sunshine. Come on, let's go inside. We have so much to talk about. We sat at Mama's old kitchen table, my table now, with cups of coffee neither of us was drinking, just holding them for something to do with our hands. The table was covered with Emma's childhood belongings, the physical evidence of the first 7 years of her life, and she touched each item with reverence and wonder. I remember this, she said, picking up Mr. Flopsy. I had dreams about this rabbit. I thought I'd made him up. You slept with him every night, I told her. Wouldn't go anywhere without him. She held the stuffed animal to her chest, and I watched tears slide down her face. I had another life before, she whispered. All those years, I thought the memories were just dreams, just my imagination. Carol told me I had a very active imagination. The name sent a spike of anger through me, but I pushed it down. This wasn't the time for that rage. This was time for healing. We talked for hours that first day. Emma told me about her life, and I tried to reconcile the story she was telling with the nightmare I'd lived. She'd grown up in small towns across the South, homeschooled until high school when Carol finally felt safe enough to enroll her in public school in Asheville, North Carolina. She'd been a good student, loved art and literature, had gotten a scholarship to UNC Charlotte where she'd studied graphic design. Carol was proud of me, Emma said, and I could hear the conflict in her voice. She came to my graduation, cried when I got my diploma. She was a good mother to me, Mom. I know that's hard to hear, but it's true. It was hard to hear. It felt like swallowing glass. But I understood what Emma was trying to tell me, that her life hadn't been a horror story, that she'd been loved, that her childhood had held moments of happiness. And as much as I hated Carol Bennett for what she'd done, I was grateful that Emma hadn't suffered, hadn't been abused or neglected. I'm glad, I said, forcing the words out. I'm glad you were loved. I'm glad you were safe. Even if it wasn't with me, I'm glad. Emma's face crumpled. I should have known something was wrong. I should have questioned things more. Maybe I could have found you sooner. You were a child, I said firmly. None of this is your fault, not a single bit of it. She told me about the last 3 years, about frantically searching for me after Carol died, about the guilt and confusion of grieving a woman who'd kidnapped her while simultaneously trying to find her real family. She'd found distant cousins on Robert's side through ancestry websites, found his obituary, found mentions of my name, and eventually tracked me down through social media. I almost called 100 times, she admitted. I'd dial the number and hang up before it rang. I was terrified you'd reject me, that you'd blame me for not finding you sooner, that you'd hate me for loving Carol. I reached across the table and took her hands, held them tight. I could never hate you. Never. You're my daughter. You're my heart. Nothing changes that. We looked through photo albums, her childhood pictures that she didn't remember having taken, and my collection from the past 23 years, newspaper clippings, age progression photos, candlelight vigils, 2 parallel lives, one stolen and one destroyed, laid out on a kitchen table in a house in Kentucky. Emma stayed until late that night, neither of us willing to end the visit. When she finally said she needed to get back to Louisville, she had work Monday morning. She was a freelance designer now, doing well. I walked her to her car with my arm around her waist, still not quite believing she was real. Can I come back next weekend? She asked. You can come back anytime, I said. This is your home, Emma. It's always been your home. She hugged me again, held on tight, and then got in her car. I stood on the sidewalk and waved until her taillights disappeared around the corner, and then I went inside and cried for an hour straight. Tears of joy and grief and relief all mixed together until I couldn't tell which emotion was which. That first reunion was just the beginning. Over the next several months, Emma and I painstakingly rebuilt what had been stolen from us. She came to Ashland every weekend, sometimes staying the whole weekend. Sleeping in Mama's old room, we cooked together, watched movies, took walks around town while I showed her the places of her childhood. We went to Putnam Elementary, stood on the steps where she'd been taken. The school had been renovated since then, looked different, but Emma said she remembered it anyway. Remembered the playground, the big oak tree in the back, the way the hallway smelled like cafeteria food and floor wax. I had a friend, she said suddenly, standing there. Sophie. We were best friends. Sophie Chen, I said. Her family moved to California about 10 years ago. I can try to find her if you want. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'd like that. We went to Morrison's Diner, which had closed in 2015, but still stood empty on Winchester Avenue, windows boarded up, the old Coca-Cola sign still hanging crooked above the door. I told Emma stories about working there, about how she and Sophie would sit in booth number 7 doing homework while I finished my shift. You'd bring me chocolate milk, Emma said, the memory surfacing, with extra chocolate syrup. You remember that? I'm starting to remember a lot of things, little things, the smell of your perfume, the way you'd sing in the car, always off key, how you'd make me scrambled eggs and grape jelly toast. Each recovered memory was a gift, a piece of the past knitting itself back together. But there were hard moments too, times when Emma would call me Carol by accident and then apologize profusely. Times when she'd reference memories from her life with Carol and I'd have to fight down the jealousy and rage. Times when the complexity of our situation felt too heavy to carry. We went to therapy together, found a counselor in Huntington who specialized in reunification after trauma. Dr. Sarah Martinez helped us navigate the complicated emotions, gave us tools to communicate. Space to be angry and sad and confused without judgment. This isn't a competition, Dr. Martinez told us in one session. Maggie, you're not competing with Carol for Emma's love. Emma, you're not betraying Carol by loving your mother. Love doesn't work that way. The heart has infinite capacity. It helped, hearing that. Helped me accept that Emma had loved Carol, that she mourned her, that those feelings were valid, even though I hated the woman who'd caused them. Helped Emma accept that she could love both of us without dishonoring either. In August, about 5 months after our reunion, Emma asked if I wanted to see Carol's grave. She was buried in a cemetery in Asheville, and Emma said she visited sometimes, still trying to make sense of who Carol had been. I didn't want to go. The thought of standing at that woman's grave, of acknowledging her existence in any respectful way, made my skin crawl. But Emma needed me to go, needed me to see this part of her life, so I agreed. We drove to Asheville on a Saturday, 4 hours through the mountains. Emma talked the whole way, pointing out places she remembered, the high school she'd attended, the coffee shop where she'd had her first job, the apartment complex where she and Carol had lived. The cemetery was on a hill overlooking the city. Carol's grave was simple, a flat marker with her name and dates. Carol Ann Bennett, 1960-2021. No beloved mother, no cherished friend, just a name and the years she'd existed. I stood there looking at it, this woman who'd destroyed my life and given Emma hers, and I tried to feel something other than rage. Emma placed flowers on the grave, white roses, and I watched her lips move in a silent prayer or goodbye. "Do you want to say anything?" Emma asked me. I thought about it. Thought about all the things I'd wanted to say to Carol Bennett over the years, all the curses and accusations and demands for answers. But standing there, with Emma waiting, I realized those words wouldn't change anything. Carol was dead. The past couldn't be undone. "I hope you're at peace," I said finally, "and I hope you understand what you took from me, from us." It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't capable of that, might never be. But it was acknowledgement. Carol had existed, she'd shaped Emma's life, and hating her wouldn't bring back the years I'd lost. We left the cemetery and drove back to Ashland in relative silence, Emma's hand in mine across the console. It felt like we'd crossed some kind of threshold, acknowledged the complexity of our situation in a way that made moving forward possible. If you're still with me, if you've made it this far in this impossible, beautiful story, I want to hear from you. What do you think about all of this? Could you have forgiven? Could you have accepted? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach more people who might need to hear that even after unimaginable loss, there can be healing. Thank you for being here with me. By the fall of 2024, Emma and I had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. She'd started staying in Ashland more often, working remotely from the house on Carter Avenue. We'd converted one of the spare bedrooms into an office for her, filling it with the art supplies and computer equipment she needed. One evening in October, we were making dinner together, spaghetti and meatballs, comfort food, when Emma suddenly stopped stirring the sauce and looked at me. "I want to change my name back," she said. "Legally, I want to be Emma Rose Parker again." My heart swelled. "Are you sure? That's a big step." "I'm sure. Sarah Bennett was a lie. Emma Parker is who I really am. I want my real name back. I want my real life back." We filed the paperwork the following week. It was surprisingly simple, given everything. A petition to the court, a hearing where Emma explained the situation, and just like that, she was Emma Rose Parker again. We celebrated with cake from the same bakery I'd bought all those birthday cakes from, the ones I'd sat alone with for 23 years. "This one's different," I said, watching Emma blow out the 30 candles. "This one, we're together." That November, Emma suggested we start a tradition of our own, something that belonged just to us. We decided on a weekly dinner, every Sunday night, where we'd cook together and talk and just be mother and daughter. It became sacred time, inviolable, the anchor of both our weeks. We cooked recipes from Mama's old cookbook, the one with food-stained pages and notes in the margins. Chicken and dumplings, green bean casserole, apple pie from scratch. Emma said some of the smells triggered memories, distant echoes of a childhood she was reclaiming piece by piece. Christmas that year was the first we'd spent together in 23 years. I bought her presents like she was still 7, stuffed animals and children's books, before realizing how absurd that was and exchanging them for things a 30-year-old would actually want. Emma laughed when I told her, said it was sweet, said she would have loved the stuffed animals anyway. We went to midnight service at First Baptist on Christmas Eve, sat in the same pew where Robert and I had gotten married all those years ago. The church was decorated with poinsettias and candles, and when we sang Silent Night, Emma reached for my hand and held it tight. "I'm so glad I found you," she whispered. "I never stopped looking," I whispered back. The new year brought new challenges. In January 2025, a journalist from a regional magazine contacted us, wanted to write a story about our reunion. Emma and I discussed it at length, weighed the pros and cons of going public with what had happened. "Maybe it could help someone else," Emma said. "Maybe there's another family out there who needs to know that reunions are possible, that hope isn't foolish." We agreed to the interview. The article ran in March, on what would have been Emma's 31st birthday. The headline read, "After 23 years, Mother and Daughter Reunited." It included photos of us together, of Emma's missing poster from 2001, of the house on Montgomery Avenue where we used to live. The response was overwhelming. Letters and emails poured in from all over the country, from other parents of missing children, from adults who'd been searching for their families, from people who just wanted to say that our story had given them hope. Martha Groves called, crying happy tears. "You did it, Maggie. You got your miracle. I'm so happy for you." Agent Brennan sent a handwritten note. "In 30 years with the FBI, I worked hundreds of missing children cases. This is one of only a handful that ended this way. Thank you for letting me be part of this journey." The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children contacted us, asked if we'd be willing to speak at events to share our story with other families. We agreed, and over the next few months, Emma and I traveled to conferences and support groups, talking about our experience, offering hope to people living in the darkness we'd finally emerged from. It was healing in a way I hadn't expected. Turning our pain into something useful, something that might help others, gave meaning to the years of suffering. It didn't erase what had happened, but it transformed it, made it matter. In May, Emma moved to Ashland permanently. She'd been essentially living with me for months anyway, and her Louisville apartment lease was up. We talked about her finding her own place, but she said she wasn't ready, that she'd missed out on living with me for 23 years and wanted to make up for lost time. Besides, she said, grinning, "You're not so bad to live with, even if you do snore." "I do not snore," I protested, but we both knew I did. Robert used to tease me about it too. We settled into a life that felt both new and ancient, like we were picking up threads that had been dropped decades ago and weaving them into something whole again. Emma helped me update the house, painting rooms and replacing worn-out furniture. We planted a garden in the backyard, tomatoes and peppers and herbs, our hands in the dirt together. She met my surviving family, my brother Danny, who was amazed and overjoyed, and his kids, Emma's cousins who were around her age. We had a big family dinner, and Emma sat at the center of it, laughing and telling stories, fitting into the family like she'd always been there. In July, Emma started dating someone, a woman named Riley who worked at the public library. I was nervous when Emma first told me, worried about sharing her, worried that I wasn't enough. But Riley was lovely. Patient with my anxiety, understanding of our complicated situation. "Your mom talks about you constantly," Riley told me once, grinning. "I know more about Maggie Whitmore than I know about my own mother." It made me happy, seeing Emma build a life here, build a future that included me but wasn't limited to me. This was what I'd wanted all those years ago when I'd lost her, for her to grow up and be happy and loved. It had just taken a much longer, more painful route than I'd ever imagined. We talked about Carol sometimes, less as time went on, but Emma needed to process those 23 years, needed to make sense of the woman who'd raised her. I learned to listen without reacting, to validate Emma's feelings even when they were complicated and contradictory. "I think she was mentally ill," Emma said one night. "I don't think she was evil. I think she was broken, and she broke us in the breaking." It was a generous interpretation, more generous than I was capable of. But Emma needed to believe it, needed to find a narrative that didn't make her childhood a lie, so I let her have it. By September 2025, almost a year and a half after our reunion, Emma and I had built something that felt solid, permanent. We'd survived the initial overwhelming emotions, navigated the complicated grief and joy, learned how to be mother and daughter despite everything. One Saturday afternoon, we were going through more boxes from the attic, sorting what to keep and what to donate, when Emma found a stack of letters I'd written to her over the years. Birthday letters, Christmas letters, just because letters, hundreds of them, all unsent because I hadn't known where to send them. She read them sitting on the floor of Mama's old bedroom, tears streaming down her face, while I sat beside her, my arm around her shoulders. "You never gave up on me," she said, her voice breaking. "All these years, you never stopped believing I was out there." "Never," I confirmed. "Not for a single day." She turned to me, this beautiful woman who was my daughter, who I'd lost and found and lost and found again. "I want you to know something. The years with Carol, they happened. They're part of me. But so are the years with you, even the ones we didn't get to spend together. You were always my mother, always. Time and distance and someone else's madness didn't change that. We held each other and cried, mourning what we'd lost while celebrating what we'd found. It was both beautiful and heartbreaking, this moment of complete honesty and vulnerability. That evening, Emma asked if I'd help her with a project. She wanted to create a photo timeline, a visual representation of her whole life, the 7 years before, the 23 years during, and everything after. We worked on it for weeks, scanning photos, creating a massive collage that we hung in the hallway. Looking at it, you could see the story: baby Emma, toddler Emma, little girl Emma smiling gap-toothed at the camera. Then a gap, a blank space where years should have been. Then teenage Sarah, young adult Sarah, the progression of a life lived under a different name. And finally, Emma again, Emma returned, Emma reclaimed, side by side with me. "This is who I am," she said, standing back to look at it, all of it, the whole messy, complicated, beautiful story. In October, we received word that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children wanted to feature our story in their annual report to highlight the importance of never giving up hope. We agreed, and they sent a professional photographer to Ashland to take pictures of us. The photo they chose showed Emma and me on the porch swing at the house on Carter Avenue, her head on my shoulder, both of us smiling but with tears in our eyes. It was real, raw, honest. It captured everything, the pain and the joy and the complicated love that had survived despite everything. Riley proposed to Emma in November, a sweet proposal at the library where they'd met, surrounded by books and friends. Emma called me immediately, her voice high with excitement. "Mom, I'm getting married. Mom, she asked me to marry her." I cried happy tears, told her I was thrilled, asked if she'd set a date. They were thinking next summer, a small wedding, maybe in the backyard of the house on Carter Avenue. "I want you to walk me down the aisle," Emma said. "I know it's usually a father, but you're all I have. You're all I need." My heart felt like it might burst. "I'd be honored," I managed to say. The wedding planning became a project that consumed us in the best way. Emma wanted simple and meaningful, close friends and family, homemade food, flowers from our garden. She asked Danny to officiate, found her dress at a vintage shop in Charleston, chose readings that spoke to overcoming adversity and finding your way home. As 2025 drew to a close, I found myself in a place I'd never imagined I'd reach, genuinely happy. Not happiness despite the pain, but happiness that encompassed it, that acknowledged the scars while celebrating the healing. Emma and I spent New Year's Eve together, just the two of us, watching the ball drop on TV like we'd done when she was little. At midnight, we toasted with sparkling cider, and I made a wish. Not for Emma to come home. That wish had been granted, but for all the mothers still waiting, still hoping, still searching in the darkness. May they find their way to peace, whatever form that takes. The wedding took place on June 14th, 2026, on a perfect Saturday that seemed designed by the universe itself. The backyard looked magical. White chairs set up on the grass, an arbor covered in climbing roses, mason jars filled with wildflowers on every surface. I helped Emma get dressed in Mama's old room, buttoning the tiny buttons up the back of her vintage lace dress. She was radiant, glowing with happiness, and when she turned to face me, I saw both the woman she'd become and the little girl she'd been. "How do I look?" she asked. "Like the most beautiful bride in the world," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Your father would be so proud of you. I wish he could see this." "He is seeing it," Emma said, touching the locket around her neck that held Robert's picture. "I know he is." The ceremony was small and intimate. About 30 people gathered in the backyard. Danny stood under the arbor in his suit, looking official and trying not to cry. Riley waited there too, gorgeous in a tailored suit, her eyes locked on Emma with a love so obvious it made my heart ache in the best way. And I walked Emma down the makeshift aisle between the chairs, my daughter's arm linked through mine, while someone played At Last on a speaker. Every eye was on Emma, but I felt the weight of the moment. How impossible this day had seemed, how miraculous it was that we were here. When we reached the arbor, I kissed Emma's cheek and whispered, "I love you. I'm so proud of you." "I love you too, Mom," she whispered back. I took my seat in the front row and watched my daughter get married, watched her promise forever to someone who loved her, watched her smile so wide it looked like her face might split from the joy. And I cried, but they were good tears, grateful tears, tears that acknowledged the journey while celebrating the destination. The reception was in the same backyard, tables set up under string lights, music playing from speakers, everyone dancing and laughing and celebrating love in all its forms. Emma and Riley had their first dance, then Emma pulled me up for a mother-daughter dance while Somewhere Over the Rainbow played. "Thank you for never giving up on me," Emma said as we swayed together. "Thank you for keeping the faith even when it seemed impossible." "Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did," I told her, "even in the missing years. Even in the darkness, loving you was easy." Later, when the party was winding down and guests were saying their goodbyes, Emma found me sitting on the porch swing, watching the last of the evening light fade from the sky. "Hey," she said, sitting down beside me, "what are you thinking about?" "Everything," I said honestly. "How far we've come, how different things could have been, how grateful I am that I get to be here, that I get to see you happy." Emma leaned her head on my shoulder, just like she used to when she was small. "I'm writing a book," she said suddenly, "about our story, about being taken and found and everything in between. Would that be okay with you?" "More than okay," I said. "I think people need to hear it, need to know that happy endings are possible, even when they seem impossible." "Will you help me write it?" "Of course, we'll tell it together." We sat there as darkness fell, mother and daughter, survivors and victors, living proof that love endures, that hope matters, that even the longest nightmare can end in sunshine. Now, as I sit here telling you this story, it's been almost 2 years since that phone call that changed everything. Emma and Riley live in the house on Carter Avenue with me. We all agreed it's big enough for 3, and I love having them here. Emma's book is being published next spring, and she's using her platform to advocate for missing children and their families. I'm 70 years old now, and I've lived through more than most people could imagine. I've loved and lost and grieved and healed. I've spent 23 years in a darkness so complete I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. And I've emerged on the other side, scarred but stronger, broken but mended, changed but whole. People ask me sometimes how I survived all those years, how I kept going when there was no end in sight, when every day was a reminder of what I'd lost. The truth is, I don't know. I just did. I kept breathing because stopping wasn't an option. I kept hoping because the alternative was despair. I kept loving Emma because love doesn't need proximity to exist. If you're going through something dark right now, something that feels impossible to survive, I want you to know this. You're stronger than you think. The human heart has an incredible capacity for endurance, for hope, for love that transcends circumstances. Hold on, keep going. The story isn't over until you decide it's over. And to the mothers out there who are still waiting, still searching, still hoping for their own miracles, I see you. I was you. Don't give up. Keep the rooms ready. Keep their memories alive. Keep believing that somewhere, somehow, they're thinking of you too. Because sometimes, against all odds, the impossible happens. Sometimes prayers get answered. Sometimes daughters come home. Before I go, I need to ask something of you. If this story touched you, if it gave you hope, or made you think differently about never giving up, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought, or where you're watching from, or share your own story if you feel moved to do so. And if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please do. Your support helps me share more stories like this one, stories of women over 50 who refused to let life defeat them, who found strength in the darkness and emerged into the light. Every like, every comment, every subscription helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring. It means more than you know. My life didn't turn out the way I planned. I didn't get the storybook ending where everything was perfect and nothing hurt. But I got something better. I got the truth. I got resilience. I got a second chance at motherhood with a daughter who chose to come home, who chose to rebuild what was stolen, who chose love over bitterness. Emma tells me sometimes that she's amazed by me, by my strength, by my refusal to give up. But I tell her the truth. She's the strong one. She survived being torn from everything she knew. She survived living a life that wasn't really hers. She survived the truth when it finally came out. And she actively chose to find me, to rebuild our relationship, to reclaim her identity. We're writing the book together, Emma and I, taking turns with chapters, showing both perspectives of this impossible story. It's hard, reliving those years, putting words to the pain. But it's also healing, transformative, a way of taking back the narrative that was stolen from us. The book is called 23 Years, A Mother, a Daughter, and the Long Road Home. It comes out next April, and I hope it helps someone, somewhere, who's living their own nightmare. I hope it reminds people that lost things can be found, that broken things can be mended, that it's never too late to come home. I've learned that life isn't about avoiding pain. Pain is inevitable, especially when you love deeply. Life is about what you do with the pain, how you transform it, whether you let it destroy you or forge you into something stronger. I've learned that hope isn't foolish. Hope is survival. Hope is the thing that kept me breathing through 23 years of not knowing. Hope is the light you carry through the darkness, even when you can't see where you're going. And I've learned that it's never too late to start over, never too late to heal, never to build the relationship you want with the people you love. Emma was 7 when I lost her and 30 when I found her, but we've built something beautiful in the time since. Age is just a number. Time is just a measure. Love is the only thing that really matters. If you're reading this and you're over 50, over 60, over 70, and you think it's too late for you to change your life, to pursue your dreams, to heal from your wounds, you're wrong. I'm 70 years old, and I'm just beginning to understand what happiness looks like. I'm just learning how to live without the constant weight of grief. I'm just discovering who Maggie Whitmore is when she's not defined by loss. It's never too late to become who you were meant to be. It's never too late to find joy. It's never too late to come home to yourself. My daughter came back to me after 23 years. If that miracle is possible, then anything is possible. Hold on to that. Hold on to hope. Hold on to love. And never, ever give up. Emma is in the kitchen right now, making dinner with Riley, and I can hear them laughing. It's an ordinary sound, a Tuesday evening sound, but to me, it's symphony. It's proof that nightmares end. It's evidence that prayers get answered, even when the answer takes decades to arrive. I'm going to go join them now. Going to set the table and pour the wine and sit down with my family, my daughter and her wife, in my house on an ordinary Tuesday that feels like a miracle. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about an old woman's journey through hell and back. Thank you for believing, with me, that hope matters. May you find your own way home, whatever that looks like. May you discover your own strength in the darkness. May you learn, as I did, that love endures beyond time and distance and unimaginable pain. And may you never, ever give up. With all my love and gratitude, Maggie Rose Whitmore.